The courtroom fell silent as 14-year-old Marcus Thompson rose from his seat, pointed directly at one of Boston's most esteemed judges, and declared, "Your interpretation of the Fourth Amendment is fundamentally incorrect, Your Honor." His clear voice cut through the stunned silence. No one could have imagined that this single moment of defiance would expose a nationwide evidence-tampering scandal, bring down a network of corrupt law enforcement officials, and lead to the largest judicial reform in Massachusetts history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, Marcus sat at his desk in his family's modest apartment, surrounded by case law books and legal documents. His father's reading glasses perched precariously on his nose as he pored over trial transcripts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his bedroom wall, but he barely noticed the time passing. "Marcus!" his father's voice called from downstairs. "Dinner's ready, son." "Just a minute, Dad," Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on his computer screen. Something about the pattern of evidence submissions in Judge Sullivan's recent cases didn't add up, and he could feel it in his bones. The smell of his father's famous lasagna finally drew him downstairs, where James Thompson waited at their small kitchen table. His father's security guard uniform was pressed and ready for his night shift, but his eyes betrayed his worry. A letter from the public defender's office lay unopened beside his plate. "You should be enjoying your summer vacation, not buried in those legal documents," James said softly. Marcus shook his head. "The patterns are wrong, Dad. Look at this." He pulled out his laptop, showing the spreadsheet he'd created. "I've analyzed every criminal case in Judge Sullivan's court for the past 3 years. The prosecution's evidence submissions follow an impossible pattern. Key evidence always appears exactly 3 days before trial, always with the same 2 evidence technicians signing off, always in cases where defendants can't afford private attorneys." James sighed. "Marcus, sometimes things are just too big for us to fight. Judge Sullivan has been on the bench for 20 years. The system is rigged," Marcus interrupted, "and it gets worse. Remember Mr. Rodriguez from your building, the one convicted of drug possession last year? I found irregularities in his evidence log. The timestamps don't match the police body cam footage. It's like the evidence existed before it was even collected." Before James could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Through the window, they could see an unmarked police car idling at the curb. James opened the door to find Detective Sarah Blackwood, head of the Evidence Control Unit, standing on their steps. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she said smoothly, "I thought we should have a chat before. Your son's presentation to the Youth Legal Advisory Board tomorrow. Make things easier for everyone." Marcus stepped forward. "You mean you want us to drop the evidence analysis without a fight?" Blackwood's smile tightened. "Young man, these are complicated matters that children shouldn't concern themselves with. Like how evidence timestamps are being systematically altered, or how body cam footage disappears in cases assigned to Judge Sullivan." The detective's face darkened. "You should teach your son to respect law enforcement, Mr. Thompson. Boston can be a difficult city for people who make the wrong enemies." "Are you threatening my son?" James's voice was steel. "Of course not, just offering friendly advice." Blackwood straightened her jacket. "See you at tomorrow's board meeting. Judge Sullivan doesn't like to be kept waiting." After she left, James locked the door with trembling hands. "Marcus, what have you gotten yourself into?" "The truth, Dad, and they're scared of it." Later that night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk reviewing case files and body cam timestamps. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Drop it. Some questions shouldn't be asked." Marcus stared at the message, then at the files spread across his desk. Tomorrow he would stand before Judge Sullivan and the Youth Legal Advisory Board. Tomorrow, he would either expose a system of evidence manipulation or learn firsthand how the justice system silenced those who dared to question it. He thought about Mr. Rodriguez, about all the other defendants who couldn't afford private attorneys, all the people who lost their freedom because of tainted evidence. Marcus picked up the latest case file, his mind racing through timestamps and access logs. In the margin, he wrote a single word: tomorrow. The night grew deeper, but Marcus kept working. He knew that in just a few hours, he would either expose the truth or learn firsthand just how far the system would go to keep its secrets. One thing was certain: Judge Sullivan had no idea what was coming. Morning light filtered through the courthouse windows as Marcus and his father made their way. Through security, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations, while portraits of past judges watched silently from ornate frames. Marcus clutched his backpack, filled with meticulously organized evidence and analysis he'd gathered over the past months. "Remember what I taught you about respect in court," James whispered, adjusting his son's tie. "Yes, Dad. But remember what you taught me about standing up for what's right, no matter what." They entered courtroom 307, where Judge Sullivan's name gleamed in gold letters on the door. Inside, Detective Blackwood sat at a side table, arranging papers with calculated precision. She smirked when she saw them. "Ah, the Thompsons. Ready to reconsider your position." Before they could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "All rise! The Honorable Judge Catherine Sullivan presiding." Judge Sullivan swept into the courtroom, her black robes billowing. Her steel-grey eyes scanned the room, settling briefly on Marcus before she took her seat. The Youth Legal Advisory Board members, a mix of legal professionals and community leaders, sat in a panel to her right. "First presentation," Judge Sullivan announced, her voice carrying years of authority. "Marcus Thompson on patterns in evidence processing." She raised an eyebrow. "Though I must say, this is an unusual topic for our youth program." Marcus stood, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to present my findings on systematic irregularities in evidence handling across multiple jurisdictions." Detective Blackwood shifted in her seat. "Your Honor, perhaps this isn't appropriate for—" "Let the boy speak," came a new voice. FBI Special Agent Elena Martinez sat in the back row, her presence unannounced until now. She'd been investigating police corruption cases across New England, though no one knew she'd be here today. Marcus connected his laptop to the courtroom's display system. "Over the past 3 years, I've analyzed every criminal case in this jurisdiction where the defendant relied on public defenders. I've discovered a pattern that can't be explained by coincidence." He pulled up his first chart, showing evidence submission timestamps. In 83% of these cases, crucial evidence appears exactly 3 days before trial. The same 2 evidence technicians, Officers Jenkins and Ramirez, sign off on every submission. But here's where it gets interesting. Marcus clicked to the next slide, revealing body camera footage timestamps. The metadata from officer body cams shows evidence being collected after it was supposedly logged into the system. In some cases, evidence exists in the database hours or even days before the crimes allegedly occurred. The room tensed. Judge Sullivan's knuckles whitened on her gavel. "Young man, these are serious allegations." "Yes, they are," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "And it gets worse. I cross-referenced these cases with conviction rates. In every instance where evidence showed these irregular patterns, defendants were convicted. Most couldn't afford to challenge the evidence-handling procedures." He brought up another document. "This is Mr. Rodriguez's case from last year. The evidence log shows drugs were catalogued at 2:15 p.m. on May 12th. but Officer Peterson's body cam shows him finding those same drugs at 4:30 p.m. The evidence existed in the system 2 hours before it was even discovered. Detective Blackwood stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is absurd. A child playing with timestamps he doesn't understand." "Actually," Agent Martinez interrupted, standing, "the FBI's Forensic Technology Unit has found similar discrepancies. We've been building a case for months." She approached the bench, producing her credentials, "And young Mr. Thompson just provided the pattern we've been looking for." Judge Sullivan's face had gone pale. Marcus noticed her glancing at Detective Blackwood, a silent exchange that confirmed his suspicions, but he wasn't done. "There's more," he continued, pulling up his final slides. "I traced the digital signatures on the evidence submissions. They all route through a specific server, one registered to a private company called Secure Evidence Solutions, a company that, until 3 years ago, was owned by Judge Sullivan's brother-in-law." The room erupted in whispers. Agent Martinez was already on her phone, likely calling for backup. Detective Blackwood had gone very still, her hand hovering near her phone. "That's enough!" Judge Sullivan slammed her gavel. "This meeting is adjourned. Mr. Thompson, you are walking a very dangerous line." "No, Your Honor," Marcus said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You're the one who crossed a line. Every person convicted using tampered evidence is someone's father, mother, son, or daughter. Every false conviction destroys a family, and it has to stop." The doors burst open as FBI agents entered, led by Agent Martinez's supervisor, Deputy Director Chen. "Judge Sullivan, Detective Blackwood, please remain in the courtroom. We have some questions about Secure Evidence Solutions." As agents secured the room, Marcus felt his father's hand on his shoulder. James Thompson stood proud, tears in his eyes. "You did it, son. You really did it." But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. His phone buzzed with a message from Agent Martinez. "We need to talk. This goes deeper than even you know." Outside the courtroom, reporters were already gathering. Drawn by the unusual FBI presence, Marcus could see Detective Blackwood being escorted to an interview room, her face a mask of cold fury. Judge Sullivan sat at her bench, her authority crumbling, as agents collected her devices and files. The truth was finally coming to light. But as Marcus would soon learn, they'd only scratched the surface of a conspiracy that would shake the foundations of the justice system itself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The FBI's downtown Boston field office hummed with activity as Marcus sat in a conference room, surrounded by case files and computer screens. Agent Martinez spread photographs across the table while Deputy Director Chen reviewed Marcus's original data analysis. "What you've uncovered," Chen said, studying a network diagram, "goes far beyond evidence tampering. Look at this." He pulled up financial records on a large monitor. Secure Evidence Solutions isn't just one company. It's a hub for a network of private correctional facilities, all profiting from these wrongful convictions. Marcus leaned forward, examining the documents. The same pattern of 3-day evidence submissions appears in 5 other jurisdictions, all connected to private prisons owned by... He stopped, his eyes widening. The Blackwood family. Detective Sarah Blackwood's father, Richard Blackwood, Martinez confirmed, former judge, current CEO of Atlantic Corrections Corporation. Every person wrongfully convicted through tampered evidence ends up in one of his facilities. The longer they stay, the more money his company makes. James Thompson, who had refused to leave his son's side, shook his head in disgust. "They're not just destroying lives, they're profiting from it." Before they could continue, a young FBI analyst burst into the room. "Agent Martinez, you need to see this. We just found sealed records from Judge Sullivan's early career. 10 years ago, she presided over a case involving police brutality. The defendant was my mother, a new voice said. They turned to find Michael Rodriguez standing in the doorway, the man whose case had first caught Marcus's attention. Catherine Sullivan was the judge who dismissed all evidence of police misconduct. The officers involved went on to hire positions including Sarah Blackwood. Marcus's mind raced. That's why Mr. Rodriguez was targeted. They knew he was investigating the old case. Not just investigating, Rodriguez said, placing a USB drive on the table. I was gathering proof. My wife was a court clerk before she died. She kept copies of everything, evidence logs, witness statements, surveillance footage, all showing how they buried police misconduct cases. When they found out I had the files, they planted evidence to silence you, Marcus finished. His laptop pinged with an alert. And look at this. Every judge who handled police misconduct cases in the past decade received regular payments from shell companies linked to Atlantic Corrections. Suddenly, the building's security alarms blared. Breach in the evidence storage facility, a voice announced over the intercom. Unauthorized access detected. They're trying to destroy the physical evidence, Martinez said. Already moving. Chen locked down the building. But Marcus noticed something on his screen. Wait, the breach is a distraction. Look at these network traces. Someone's accessing the FBI's sealed case files remotely. They're not trying to destroy evidence. They're stealing information about confidential informants. If they identify our witnesses. Chen didn't finish the thought. They all knew what happened to people who testified against corrupt officials. Martinez's phone rang. What? When? Her face darkened. Judge Sullivan was just found unconscious in her holding cell. Apparent suicide attempt, but the timing's too perfect, Marcus said. They're tying up loose ends. James put his hand on his son's shoulder. Maybe we should step back, Marcus. Let the FBI handle... No, Dad. Marcus's voice was firm. Remember what you always say. Justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you fight for. These people thought their power made them untouchable. That's why they got sloppy. That's why they left patterns a 14-year-old could find. Rodriguez nodded. The boy's right. I lost 3 years of my life because I stayed quiet. How? Many others are still sitting in cells because everyone was too afraid to speak up. Chen's phone buzzed with updates. Multiple breaches reported at federal courthouses across New England. They're not just covering tracks, they're destroying decades of evidence. Not everything, Marcus said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. They think the evidence is just in official databases, but I've been making copies, storing them on secure servers. Every log, every timestamp, every financial record. Even if they burn the courthouses down, the truth survives. Martinez studied the young man with new respect. You planned for this. I learned from my dad, Marcus replied. He always says hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. The worst is happening, but we're ready. Suddenly, every screen in the room lit up with incoming data. What's happening? Chen demanded. Remember those pattern irregularities I found, Marcus explained. They weren't just mistakes. They were breadcrumbs. Other people noticed too. Court clerks, evidence technicians, public defenders. They've been gathering proof, waiting for someone to connect the dots. And now they're all coming forward, Rodriguez finished, watching as more files poured in. Stories of evidence-tampering, witness intimidation, judicial corruption, all carefully documented, all pointing to the same network of powerful figures who thought they were above the law. Outside the FBI building, news vans began arriving. The story was breaking, but in that conference room, surrounded by evidence of corruption and courage, Marcus realized something important. The truth wasn't just about exposing the guilty, it was about restoring faith in justice itself. His phone buzzed with another threat. "You have no idea what's coming, boy." "Actually," Marcus typed back, "for the first time, everyone knows exactly what's coming. Justice." The storm was just beginning, but this time the light of truth would outshine the darkness of corruption, and it all started because one young man dared to question a judge's authority and stand up for what was right. The next 48 hours transformed Boston's legal landscape. As Marcus worked with the FBI team, the full scope of the corruption began to emerge. The conference room had become a command center, walls covered with connection maps and timelines stretching back decades. "Another judge just came forward," Agent Martinez announced, hanging up her phone. "Judge William Chen from Rhode Island says he was pressured to approve evidence submissions without proper review. When he refused—" "Let me guess," Marcus said, pulling up a database. "Sudden accusations of misconduct, threats to family members." "Exactly. They tried to force him off the bench, but he kept detailed records, including recordings." Deputy Director Chen studied a new batch of financial documents. "The money trail is staggering. Atlantic Corrections Corporation didn't just profit from wrongful convictions. They used the inmates for cheap labor, manufacturing everything from furniture to electronics." "Modern-day slavery," James Thompson said quietly, "hidden behind legal paperwork." Marcus's laptop chimed with an alert. "Look at this pattern. Every time a judge or attorney started asking questions, a major case would land on their desk. Usually drug charges, always with perfectly documented evidence." "Perfectly fabricated evidence," Rodriguez corrected. "Reviewing old case files. They didn't just frame innocence, they targeted potential whistleblowers." A young public defender named Sarah Hassan burst into the room, clutching a stack of files. "You need to see this. I've been reviewing cases. From the past 5 years, it's not just criminal court. They've infiltrated family court, immigration hearings, even bankruptcy proceedings." Marcus quickly scanned the new documents. "The pattern extends beyond criminal cases. They're controlling every aspect of the legal system. Look, families separated, properties seized, asylum seekers deported, all based on manufactured evidence." "But why?" James asked. "Why go beyond criminal cases?" "Control," a new voice answered. They turned to find Dr. Diana Wells, a legal ethics professor from Harvard, standing in the doorway. "I've been studying judicial corruption for 20 years. This isn't just about profit, it's about power. Control the courts, you control everything." Before she could elaborate, Marcus's system flagged another pattern. "The warehouse fires reported last night. They weren't random. Every location stored evidence from cases handled by judges in their network. They're destroying physical proof." "Not everything," Hassan said, producing a small hard drive. "Some of us saw this coming. Court clerks, paralegals, public defenders. We've been making copies, building our own encrypted database. We just needed someone to expose the system first." Martinez's phone buzzed with urgent news. "Judge Sullivan is awake, but she's asking for you, Marcus. Says she'll only talk to the boy who figured it out." "It's a trap," James protested. "They're desperate. They'll do anything to silence him." "Maybe," Marcus said, studying the message, "or maybe she's realized the truth about her own role in their system. Either way, we need to know what she knows." Dr. Wells approached the evidence wall. "You've uncovered something they thought impossible. A 14-year-old boy saw through decades of carefully constructed corruption. You've given others courage to come forward." Marcus's phone lit up with messages from across the country. Other students, inspired by his stand, were beginning to analyze court records in their own cities. Patterns similar to Boston's were emerging in Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles. "It's spreading," Hassan observed. "People are finally asking questions." Suddenly, every device in the room received the same alert. Last chance. Walk away now. Some systems can't be changed. But as Marcus read the threat, he noticed something in the message's metadata. They're scared, he realized. Look at the routing. This came from inside the Massachusetts State House. We're closer than they thought. Deputy Director Chen's team had traced the network's digital architecture, the system they used to manipulate evidence. It's connected to every courthouse in New England, one central point of control, which means one point of vulnerability. Marcus finished. His fingers flew across the keyboard, analyzing access patterns. They didn't expect anyone to find it, so they got careless. Left back doors open. If we can access their central server, we can expose every case they've manipulated, Martinez understood. Every judge they've compromised. More than that, Hassan added. We can prove which cases used fabricated evidence, give innocent people their lives back. Dr. Wells nodded approvingly. They built a system of control, but systems can be dismantled, especially by those who understand their weaknesses. James watched his son work, pride mixing with concern. All this started because you wouldn't accept a simple, "That's just how things are." No, Dad, Marcus corrected, still typing. It started because you taught me that justice matters, that standing up for truth is worth any risk. Outside, more news vans arrived as the story grew. But inside that conference room, a 14-year-old boy and his unlikely allies were about to strike at the heart of corruption itself. The system had seemed invincible because everyone was too afraid to question it. But now, that was about to change. Marcus's screen filled with data as he accessed the central server. "They're right about one thing," he said. "Some systems can't be changed." He pressed enter, launching the program that would expose decades of corruption. Sometimes they need to be rebuilt from the ground up. The revolution in justice was about to begin. The secure wing of Massachusetts General Hospital cast long shadows as Marcus approached Judge Sullivan's room, flanked by Agent Martinez and 2 FBI guards. Through the window, he could see the once powerful judge, looking small and pale against the white hospital sheets, monitoring equipment beeping steadily beside her. "Remember," Martinez whispered, "she's still dangerous. Even cornered, people like her have contingency plans." Marcus nodded, thinking of the USB drive hidden in his shoe, containing a backup of everything they'd discovered. His father had taught him well, always have a safety net. Inside the room, Judge Sullivan's eyes opened as they entered. For a moment, she simply studied Marcus, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You remind me of someone," she said finally, her voice rough. "A young lawyer I knew, decades ago." He had the same look in his eyes when he discovered his first injustice. "What happened to him?" Marcus asked, though something in her tone made him suspect the answer. "They destroyed him, just like they'll try to destroy you." She shifted, in the bed, wincing. "Unless you understand what you're really fighting." Martinez stepped forward. "Judge Sullivan, if you're ready to make a statement—" "Not to you," Sullivan interrupted. "Him. He saw what everyone else missed. He deserves to know why." Marcus pulled up a chair while Martinez recorded the conversation. Sullivan's next words shocked them all. "It didn't start with evidence-tampering," she began. "It started with a case 30 years ago, a massive class action lawsuit against Atlantic Corrections Corporation for inmate abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. Richard Blackwood stood to lose everything." She paused, gathering strength, but instead of facing justice, he created a system to prevent it. First he bought judges, then prosecutors. Finally, he built secure evidence solutions, a way to control what truth made it into courtrooms. "But why help him?" Marcus pressed. "You were already a respected judge." "Because he knew my secret." Sullivan's voice cracked. That young lawyer I mentioned. He found proof of judicial misconduct in my early cases. Before he could expose it, he died in an apparent robbery. His name was Thomas Thompson. Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. Thompson? But that's your grandfather, Sullivan confirmed. I didn't know, not until I saw your name on the Youth Advisory Board application. By then, I was too deep in their system to get out. James Thompson burst into the room, having heard everything from the hallway. You helped kill my father? No! Sullivan's heart monitor spiked. I thought they would just scare him off. When I realized what they'd done, Blackwood had evidence of my involvement. He owned me, just like he owned everyone else. Marcus's mind raced, connecting new dots. That's why you kept looking at me strangely in court. You knew who I was. You have his same determination, Sullivan said. But you did what he couldn't. You found the pattern. The evidence didn't just appear 3 days before trials by coincidence. That's when Secure Evidence Solutions runs its verification process, really a program to alter timestamps, modify documents, create perfect trails for fabricated evidence. Martinez was already making calls, mobilizing teams to secure the company's servers. But Sullivan wasn't finished. The family court cases, immigration hearings, those weren't just for profit. They were for control. Break families, deport witnesses, seize assets, make sure no one has the resources to fight back. Suddenly, the hospital lights flickered. Marcus's phone buzzed with an alert from the FBI command center. Massive data deletions were being detected across the judicial network. They're not just destroying evidence now, he realized. They're erasing everything, every trace of every case they've touched. Sullivan struggled to sit up. There's a failsafe. Blackwood didn't trust computers alone, paper records stored in a secure facility beneath the old courthouse. Everything they ever did documented in hard copy. Insurance, in case anyone in the network tried to turn against them. Why tell us this now? James demanded. Because 30 years ago I chose wrong, Sullivan said. I chose fear over justice, power over truth. Maybe helping you is the only way to finally make it right. Marcus's laptop chimed with urgent messages from Hassan and Dr. Wells. Similar data purges were starting in other states. The corruption network was initiating its doomsday protocol. We need those paper records, Martinez said. Without them, thousands of wrongful convictions stand. The facility has biometric security, Sullivan warned, and Blackwood will have guards there already. The minute he detected the data deletions, he would have moved to protect his insurance policy. Marcus stood, determination hardening his features. Then we'd better move fast, because this isn't just about exposing corruption anymore. This is about justice, for my grandfather, for Mr. Rodriguez, for everyone they've hurt. His phone buzzed one final time. You should have walked away, boy. Now you'll understand why some secrets stay buried. But Marcus wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time, he understood completely why he'd been drawn to study court cases, why patterns had always fascinated him. It wasn't just academic curiosity. It was inheritance. His grandfather's pursuit of justice lived on through him. They thought burying one truth-seeker would protect them forever, he told his father. Instead, they created a legacy they never expected. Outside the hospital room, storms gathered over Boston. In secure facilities across New England, corrupt officials scrambled to cover their tracks. But they had never faced an enemy like this. A boy with his grandfather's courage and his own unique ability to see through their deceptions. The final battle for truth was about to begin, and this time justice would not be denied. The old Suffolk County courthouse loomed against the stormy sky as Marcus studied its blueprint on his laptop. The FBI command van hummed with activity. Around him, agents preparing for what could be their only chance to secure decades of evidence. The underground facility has 3 security levels, Agent Martinez explained, pointing to the schematics. Biometric scanners, armed guards, and a sophisticated ventilation system that can flood the entire space with knockout gas if breached. They really thought of everything, James observed, studying the plans. Almost everything, Marcus replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed no one would find their pattern. Dr. Wells leaned forward, intrigued. What do you mean? The biometric security system, Marcus explained, pulling up. Technical specifications. It's not just about fingerprints or retinal scans. It records access patterns, who enters, when, and in what sequence. And like everything else they've done, there's a pattern, Hassan finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. They couldn't help themselves. Marcus nodded. Every Tuesday and Friday, exactly at 2:15 p.m., someone accesses the facility, always following the same route, always spending exactly 47 minutes inside. That's not human behavior. That's programmed routine. Maintenance checks, Rodriguez realized. They automated them to minimize human contact with the evidence. Which means... Marcus typed rapidly, his screen filling with code. The system is designed to accept certain patterns without question, if we can replicate their exact sequence. Deputy Director Chen's phone buzzed urgently. We've got movement. Multiple vehicles approaching the courthouse. Blackwood's people are already here. Through the van's windows, they could see black SUVs taking up strategic positions around the building. Our men in tactical gear emerged, their movements professional and coordinated. They're not just guards, Martinez observed. Those are ex-military contractors. We don't have much time, James warned. Once they realize we know about the paper records, then we give them something else to worry about, Marcus said, initiating a program he'd prepared. Suddenly, alarms blared across the courthouse complex. Fire suppression systems activated, sprinklers spraying in every corridor except one specific route, the path they needed. Nice, Hassan grinned. Create chaos to mask our real approach. But Marcus wasn't done. His next command triggered emergency protocols in every connected courthouse across the state. Now they have to split their forces. They can't know which location is the real target. Rodriguez studied the security feeds. The contractors are dividing up, heading to different sites. But Blackwood himself just arrived. He pointed to a silver-haired man emerging from an armored vehicle, his expensive suit at odds with the tactical scene around him. Richard Blackwood, Dr. Wells said grimly. The architect of all this corruption, finally showing himself. Because he knows what those records mean, Martinez added. They're not just evidence. They're his insurance policy against everyone he's ever corrupted. If we get those files, we don't just expose him, Marcus finished. We expose everyone. James touched his son's shoulder. It's too dangerous. These men are killers. Let the FBI handle it. But Marcus stood firm. They killed grandfather because he fought alone. But I'm not alone. He looked around at his allies, FBI agents, legal experts, reformed judges, ordinary people who'd chosen truth over fear. We're stronger together. That's what they never understood. His laptop chimed with incoming messages. Hassan's network of court clerks and public defenders was mobilizing, creating distractions at courthouses across New England. Dr. Wells's legal ethics students were live streaming from every possible entrance, ensuring maximum public witnesses. Rodriguez had rallied families of wrongfully convicted inmates to gather peacefully around the building. They thought fear would keep everyone silent, Marcus said, watching the crowds grow. Instead, it just taught people to be brave together. Martinez's team was ready. They had one shot at this: access the facility, secure the records, and expose decades of corruption. But as they prepared to move, Marcus's phone lit up with a message he hadn't expected. "Hello, grandson," the text read. "You've done more than I ever could, but be careful. The evidence you seek isn't just paper. Look for the black ledger. Everything started there." "That's impossible," James whispered, seeing the message. "My father's been dead for 30 years. "Not impossible," Dr. Wells said quietly. "Judge Sullivan, she must have had access to some of his old files. She's trying to help, in her own way." Thunder crashed overhead as final preparations were made. The courthouse stood like a fortress, its secrets buried deep beneath marble and steel. But fortresses could fall. Secrets could be exposed. Justice could prevail. Marcus looked at his father, then at the team ready to risk everything for truth. "Grandfather started this fight 30 years ago. Today we finish it." Rain began to fall as they moved into position. In his mind, Marcus could almost feel his grandfather's presence, the legacy of a man who dared to challenge corruption, who died pursuing truth. But this time, things would be different. Because this time, the truth had an army on its side. Rain pounded against the courthouse windows as Marcus led the way through maintenance corridors, his laptop guiding them through the one path left dry by his selective activation of the sprinkler system. Agent Martinez and her tactical team moved silently behind him, while Hassan and Rodriguez monitored security feeds from the command van. "First checkpoint ahead," Marcus whispered into his comm unit. "Dad, are you in position?" "Ready," James responded from his post at the building's power junction. His years as a security guard had taught him everything about building systems, knowledge that was now proving invaluable. Marcus approached the biometric scanner, his heart pounding, but his hands steady. This was the moment of truth for his pattern theory. He initiated the sequence he'd discovered, the exact timing of maintenance access that had been programmed into the system. The scanner hummed, processing. For 3 terrifying seconds, nothing happened. Then green lights flashed, and the heavy security door clicked open. "It worked," Martinez breathed. "The pattern actually worked." "They became slaves to their own routine," Dr. Wells observed through the comm. "Their need for control became their weakness." But they weren't in the clear yet. As they descended deeper into the facility, Marcus's screen lit up with warnings. "Multiple heat signatures in the lower levels," he reported. "Blackwood's men beat us here." "They're moving files," Hassan confirmed, watching through security cameras, loading them into some kind of industrial shredding equipment. Suddenly a new voice crackled over their comms, Richard Blackwood himself. "Clever boy," he said, his tone almost admiring, "using our own patterns against us. But did you really think we wouldn't have a backup plan?" Gas sensors began flashing red on Marcus's laptop. "They're activating the knockout gas system." "Not just that," James warned from the power junction. "They're initiating a complete power shutdown. Once those emergency doors seal, we'll be trapped," Martinez finished, "with no air circulation." But Marcus was already moving, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Remember what I said about patterns? They don't just exist in access codes." He pulled up the building's electrical blueprints. "Dad, look at the power routing. Every system has a rhythm, including their failsafes." James studied the diagram, understanding dawning. "The emergency protocols. They cycle in sequence, if we time it right. We can ride their own shutdown protocol to get exactly where we need to go," Marcus confirmed. "Everyone, get ready to move on my mark." Through the security feeds, they watched Blackwood's men rushing to destroy evidence. But they missed something crucial. One figure moving differently than the others, placing something inside a ventilation duct before slipping away. Agent Cruz, Marcus recognized. Our undercover asset. She made it in ahead of us. The Black Ledger, Martinez realized. She must have found it. Blackwood's voice returned, angrier now. You have no idea what you're interfering with, boy. This isn't just about money or power. This is about order, structure, control. Without us, the system collapses into chaos. No, Marcus replied, letting his voice carry over the calm. Without you, the system can finally work the way it's supposed to, serving justice, not power. He gave the signal. James initiated the power sequence they'd identified. Throughout the building, systems began shutting down in a precise pattern. But within that pattern, brief windows opened, security doors cycling open for exactly 3 seconds before sealing again. Now! Marcus commanded. The team moved with perfect timing, passing through each checkpoint just as it opened, using the facility's own shutdown sequence to penetrate deeper into its secure heart. Through it all, Marcus felt a strange sense of connection to his grandfather. Thomas Thompson had fought this same battle 3 decades ago, armed only with his conviction and courage. Now his grandson led a team armed with technology, strategy, and the power of united purpose. They reached the records chamber just as Blackwood's men were feeding the last files into industrial shredders. But Agent Cruz had done her work well. The most crucial evidence, the Black Ledger containing 30 years of judicial corruption, was hidden safely in the ventilation system. It's over, Blackwood, Martinez declared as her team secured the room. We have your insurance policy. You? Blackwood's voice held a note of triumph. Check your phones. Every device lit up with breaking news. Judge Sullivan found dead in her hospital room. Security footage erased. No witnesses. You see, Blackwood continued, there are always consequences for defying the natural order. Always prices to be paid. But he hadn't counted on Marcus's foresight. Actually, the young man said, accessing a hidden server, Judge Sullivan's full confession was uploaded to secure locations the moment she finished speaking, including names, dates, and details only she could have known. Through the security feeds, they watched Blackwood's composure crack for the first time. Outside, sirens wailed as more FBI teams arrived. The crowds of witnesses had grown despite the rain, their phones recording everything. Hassan's network of legal professionals was already filing emergency motions in courts across the country. Your mistake, Marcus told Blackwood, was thinking fear was stronger than hope, that power was stronger than justice, that one man's greed was stronger than thousands of people's courage. The Black Ledger was recovered from the ventilation duct, its contents even more damning than they'd imagined. But more importantly, people everywhere were finally standing up, speaking out, demanding accountability. This is what Grandfather died for, Marcus said quietly to his father as they watched FBI agents leading away Blackwood's men. Not just exposing one corrupt judge or businessman, but showing everyone that the truth can't be buried forever. The old courthouse's corridors, once dark with secrets, now rang with the footsteps of justice, and somewhere Marcus was sure Thomas Thompson was smiling. The Boston Federal Courthouse buzzed with unprecedented activity as Marcus watched from the steps 48 hours after the raid. News helicopters circled overhead while teams of FBI agents and Justice Department officials streamed in and out. The Black Ledger had proven more explosive than anyone imagined. 27 judges suspended so far, Agent Martinez reported, checking her tablet. 15 district attorneys under investigation, and they're just starting to process the evidence. Hassan rushed up with fresh printouts. Emergency review. Panels are being established in every state. They're fast-tracking appeals for anyone convicted in compromised courts. But that's not even the biggest news, Dr. Wells added, joining them with her laptop open. Look at this. The screen showed live coverage from Washington. Congress had convened an emergency session to address the judicial crisis. Senators who had initially dismissed the scandal were now calling for comprehensive reforms as their own connections to Atlantic Corrections Corporation came to light. "They're turning on each other," Rodriguez observed. "Every corrupt official trying to save themselves by exposing someone higher up." Marcus studied the data flowing across his screen, the patterns shifting. "Look at these case reviews. Judges in other states are voluntarily disclosing potential conflicts of interest, requesting their own cases be audited." "They're scared," James said. "No," Marcus corrected. "Some of them are finally finding their courage. Fear kept them silent, but now they see there's a way out, through truth." His phone buzzed with updates from a nationwide network of student researchers he'd helped organize. Young people across the country were analyzing court records in their own districts, using the patterns Marcus had identified to spot potential corruption. "You've started something bigger than exposing one conspiracy," Dr. Wells said. "You've shown people how to question authority systematically, how to spot patterns of injustice." Deputy Director Chen arrived with new intelligence. "Blackwood's international connections are unraveling. Similar evidence manipulation schemes have been discovered in courts across Europe and Asia. Interpol is involved now." "Because corruption doesn't stay contained," Marcus explained. "It spreads until someone stands up to it, but so does justice." Suddenly, every screen in the courthouse lobby lit up with breaking news. A group of tech companies had just announced the launch of Project Transparency, an open-source artificial intelligence system designed to detect patterns of judicial misconduct and evidence tampering. "They're using your research as the foundation," Martinez said, amazed. "Your pattern recognition methods are becoming industry standard." But not everyone was celebrating. Marcus's laptop flagged urgent alerts from multiple courts. "They're not done fighting," he warned. "Look, emergency motions being filed to seal records, destroy evidence, even classify the entire investigation as a national security matter." "Standard playbook," Rodriguez noted. "When corruption can't hide in darkness, it tries to hide behind authority." "But they're missing the point," Hassan said, showing them her phone. Social media was exploding with videos of citizens peacefully monitoring their local courthouses. Community organizations were forming legal observation teams. Law students were volunteering to review old cases. The power was never in the evidence alone, Marcus realized. It was in showing people they have the right and the ability to question the system. James watched, proud tears in his eyes, as his son coordinated with teams across the country. "Your grandfather fought alone, but you've built an army. An army of truth seekers," Dr. Wells agreed. "Each one learning to spot patterns, question authority, and stand up for justice." Marcus's phone chimed with another message, this one from Judge William Chen in Rhode Island. More judges were coming forward, not just confessing past compromises, but actively working to fix the system. They were establishing new protocols for evidence handling, mandatory transparency measures, and independent oversight committees. "This is how real change happens," Marcus told the growing crowd of supporters, "not just by exposing corruption, but by building something better in its place." Hassan's network reported something remarkable. Public defenders and prosecutors in several states were establishing joint task forces to review questionable convictions. Former adversaries were now working together to ensure justice. "The system doesn't have to be adversarial," Dr. Wells explained. "It was designed to seek truth, not just win cases." Suddenly, every device received an alert from an unknown source. "You've disrupted the natural order. Chaos will follow." But Marcus saw something in the message's coding that made him smile. "Check the source," he told Martinez. "This came from inside the system, from people who still think control is more important than justice. They Don't understand, Rodriguez said. The old order was the chaos, a chaos of corruption, hiding behind authority. What's emerging now is true order, based on transparency and truth. Outside, more people gathered. Families of the wrongfully convicted, reform-minded legal professionals, ordinary citizens demanding change. They weren't an angry mob. They were engaged participants in the transformation of justice. "This is what grandfather fought for," Marcus told his father as they watched the peaceful crowd. "Not just the exposure of one corrupt network, but the awakening of everyone's responsibility to protect justice." His laptop showed the movement, spreading, other countries examining their judicial systems, international courts adopting new transparency measures, people everywhere learning to spot and challenge patterns of injustice. The revolution in justice was just beginning, and it all started because one boy dared to stand up in court and say, "You're wrong." 1 week after the Black Ledger's discovery, Marcus sat in Harvard Law School's largest auditorium, watching as legal experts from around the world gathered for an emergency symposium on judicial reform. His laptop displayed live feeds from similar meetings happening simultaneously in London, Tokyo, and Delhi. "The challenge now," Professor Isabel Chang from Yale explained to the packed room, "isn't just implementing new oversight systems. It's rebuilding public trust in justice itself. Which is why we need to focus on prevention, not just correction," Marcus added, displaying his latest analysis. "Look at these pattern recognition algorithms. They can spot potential evidence tampering before cases even reach trial." The audience leaned forward as he demonstrated the system he'd developed, a combination of artificial intelligence and human oversight that could track subtle signs of manipulation across multiple jurisdictions. But technology alone isn't enough, Dr. Wells cautioned. "We need structural change." As if to emphasize her point, Marcus's phone buzzed with urgent news. Richard Blackwood's allies in Congress were attempting to pass emergency legislation that would classify evidence-handling procedures as sensitive security information, effectively making oversight impossible. "They're adapting," Hassan observed grimly, "learning from their exposure." "No," Marcus corrected, studying the bill's language. "They're making the same mistake again, following patterns. Look at the legislative formatting. The same law firm that structured Judge Sullivan's corrupt rulings wrote this bill. Agent Martinez was already making calls. We can prove the connection, show how they're trying to legalize the same methods we just exposed." But something else caught Marcus's attention, a subtle anomaly in the courthouse's new digital security system. "They're not just trying to change laws," he realized. "This is a test run." His fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing digital signatures. The courthouse's evidence tracking system was showing microscopic discrepancies, changes, so small they would have been invisible without his enhanced pattern recognition. "They're probing the new defenses," Rodriguez understood, "testing for weaknesses." Dr. Wells gathered a team of legal technology experts. If they can find a way to manipulate evidence under the new system, they can claim the reforms. "Don't work," Marcus finished, "that we need to go back to the old way of doing things." But they hadn't counted on the power of collective vigilance. Hassan's network of court watchers reported similar anomalies in other jurisdictions. Law students using Marcus's methods were spotting attempted manipulations in real time. "This is exactly what we prepared for," Marcus said, initiating a program he'd developed. Across the country, automatic alerts went out to oversight committees and independent monitors. The attempt to subvert the new system had instead proved its effectiveness. James arrived with news from the community front. Citizens' oversight. Committees were being formed in every district, trained in basic pattern recognition and legal observation. Normal people were learning to be guardians of justice. "Your grandfather would be proud," he told Marcus, "not just of exposing corruption, but of teaching others to prevent it. Suddenly, every screen in the auditorium flashed with breaking news. The Supreme Court had just announced an unprecedented decision. They would hear an emergency appeal about the judicial reform movement itself. "This is it," Dr. Wells said, "the real test, if they rule against oversight." But Marcus saw something in the court's announcement that made him smile. Look at the filing timeline. They're not just hearing arguments about reform. They're using our new transparency protocols to do it. Every document, every piece of evidence will be publicly trackable. They're leading by example, Professor Chang realized, showing that even the highest court can operate in sunlight. Martinez's phone buzzed with updates from the FBI's International Task Force. Similar reform movements were gaining momentum globally. Courts in Europe were adopting Marcus's pattern recognition methods. Asian countries were establishing independent oversight committees. "This is how lasting change happens," Marcus told the audience. "Not through force or fear, but through showing people a better way." His laptop chimed with new data. The first results from the reformed system. Wrongful conviction rates were dropping. Evidence-tampering attempts were being caught and prevented. Most importantly, public confidence in the courts was slowly rebuilding. "But they'll keep trying to corrupt the new system," Hassan warned. "Power doesn't give up easily." "Good," Marcus replied, surprising everyone, "because now we know how to spot them. Every attempt to subvert justice just makes our detection methods stronger." The auditorium's screens filled with live feeds from courthouses across America, regular citizens monitoring proceedings, law students analyzing patterns, judges voluntarily submitting to oversight, a new culture of transparency taking root. "Your grandfather fought against corruption," James said quietly. "But you've done something even harder. You've shown people how to prevent it from taking hold in the first place." Outside, the sun broke through storm clouds that had hung over Boston all week. Marcus thought about the journey from that first moment in Judge Sullivan's courtroom to now. The old system had seemed invincible because everyone thought they had to fight it alone. But the truth was more powerful than corruption. Hope was stronger than fear, and justice, once awakened, could never be silenced again. The Supreme Court chamber hummed with anticipation as Marcus prepared to address the 9 justices. At 14, he was the youngest person ever to present an argument before the nation's highest court. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The future of judicial reform hung in the balance. "The question before us," Chief Justice Monroe began, "isn't just about oversight systems or pattern recognition. It's about the fundamental nature of justice itself. Mr. Thompson, you may proceed." Marcus stood, feeling the weight of history. Behind him sat his father, Dr. Wells, Agent Martinez, and hundreds of supporters. Millions more watched via the court's first-ever live stream, another reform sparked by recent events. "Your honors," he began, his voice steady. 30 years ago, my grandfather stood in a different courtroom, fighting the same battle we face today. He died because he fought alone. But his death wasn't the end of his fight. It was the beginning of something much bigger." His laptop displayed a real-time feed of the court's new transparency system, showing every document, every piece of evidence, tracked and verified by multiple independent observers. The old system failed, not because of individual corruption, but because it relied on darkness. Secrecy wasn't a bug, it was a feature. But justice thrives in light. Opposition lawyers, representing a coalition of private prison companies and their allies, shifted uncomfortably as Marcus continued. "In the 3 weeks since implementing these reforms, we've prevented 37 attempts at evidence tampering, not through force or surveillance, but through transparency and collective vigilance." Justice Chen leaned forward. "But the opposition argues these measures burden the courts, slow the judicial process." "Actually," Marcus replied, pulling up new data, Case resolution times have improved by 23%. When everyone can trust the process, there's less need for lengthy appeals and challenges. He demonstrated how the pattern recognition system worked, showing real examples of prevented corruption. But his most powerful evidence came from unexpected sources. Your Honours, I'd like to introduce statements from judges themselves. His screen filled with testimonials from courts across the country. Judges describing the relief of working in a transparent system. Prosecutors and defenders collaborating to ensure justice rather than just wins. The most remarkable pattern we've discovered, Marcus explained, isn't in the data, it's in human behavior. When people know they're part of a just system, they act justly. Justice Ramirez raised a critical point. But what about privacy concerns? Not every legal matter should be public. Agreed, Marcus responded. That's why our system distinguishes between transparency and publicity. Every action is tracked and verified, but access to sensitive information is carefully controlled. The point isn't to expose private details. It's to ensure proper procedures are followed. Suddenly, the courthouse's power flickered. Marcus's laptop flagged a massive cyber attack attempting to breach the court systems. But instead of causing chaos, the attack demonstrated exactly what he'd been explaining. "Watch," he told the justices as his screen showed the response unfold. Dozens of independent systems detecting the breach. Hundreds of observers verifying data backups, the entire network adapting and strengthening in real time. This is true security, Marcus explained. Not through walls and secrets, but through openness and collaboration. Dr. Wells stood to provide expert testimony describing how the reforms were already influencing legal education. "We're not just changing procedures," she explained. "We're creating a new generation of legal professionals who understand that transparency strengthens justice rather than weakening it." The opposition's final argument focused on cost, claiming the new systems were too expensive. Marcus's response surprised everyone. "The old system cost us something far more valuable than money. It cost us trust. But look at this." He displayed economic data showing reduced appeals, faster resolutions, and most importantly, fewer wrongful convictions. When justice works correctly the first time, it saves both money and lives. As the arguments concluded, Chief Justice Monroe asked one final question. "Mr. Thompson, what would you say to those who argue that a 14-year-old shouldn't be redesigning our judicial system?" Marcus stood quietly for a moment, then smiled. "I would say that justice doesn't have an age limit. My grandfather understood that. Judge Sullivan learned it too late. The truth is, sometimes it takes a child to point out what adults have accepted for too long." The chamber fell silent as his words resonated. Outside, crowds gathered on the Supreme Court steps, not in protest but in hopeful solidarity. Regular citizens standing watch over the institutions meant to serve them. His phone buzzed with messages from youth organizations worldwide, inspired by his example to start their own justice reform movements. The pattern of positive change was spreading, unstoppable now that people understood their power. "Your grandfather fought for truth," James whispered as they awaited the court's decision. "But you've given people something even more precious. The tools to protect truth themselves." Martinez showed them breaking news. Courts in autocratic countries were facing unprecedented pressure to adopt similar transparency measures. The world was watching, learning, changing. This was never just about fixing a broken system, Marcus told the assembled crowd. It was about reminding everyone that justice belongs to all of us. And when we stand together, no corruption can withstand the light of truth. The Supreme Court's decision would come soon. But in many ways, the most important verdict was already in. People everywhere had awakened to their role as guardians of justice. The transformation couldn't be stopped. It could only spread further, grow stronger, reach higher. And it all began because one boy dared to speak truth to power. The morning the Supreme Court's decision was due, Marcus stood in a place he never expected to be, the Oval Office. The president had invited him to witness the announcement alongside leaders from both parties, recognizing that this moment transcended political divisions. 9-0, the Chief Justice's voice rang through the speakers. The court unanimously upholds the judicial transparency reforms. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus was already analyzing the full opinion on his laptop. It went far beyond simply approving the new oversight systems. They've made transparency a constitutional requirement, Dr. Wells breathed, reading over his shoulder. Every court in the country must now implement similar protections. But the most surprising part came from an unexpected source. Justice Freeman, known as the court's most conservative member, had written a concurring opinion that shook the foundations of the legal world. The courage of a child, Freeman wrote, has forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our system survived on unquestioned authority rather than earned trust. Today, we choose a harder but better path, one where justice must prove itself worthy of its name every single day. Marcus's phone lit up with messages from around the world. Courts, in democracies and autocracies alike, were facing unprecedented pressure to adopt similar measures. The pattern of change was becoming unstoppable, but they're still fighting back, Agent Martinez warned, showing him new intelligence. Richard Blackwood's allies were already looking for loopholes, ways to corrupt the new system. Good, Marcus replied, surprising everyone, because now we can show the next part of the pattern. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up data from the past month of reformed court operations. Every attempt to subvert the new system had actually strengthened it, like antibodies learning to fight off infections. Look at this, he explained to the assembled leaders. Each attack forces the transparency protocols to evolve. The system doesn't just resist corruption, it learns from it. The president studied the results with interest. This goes beyond just preventing evidence-tampering, doesn't it? Much further, Dr. Wells confirmed. We're seeing a fundamental shift in how justice operates. Prosecutors and defenders collaborating to find truth rather than just win cases. Judges voluntarily submitting to oversight. Communities actively engaged in monitoring their courts. Hassan arrived with news from the grassroots level. Regular. Citizens were forming Justice Watch committees, trained in basic pattern recognition and legal observation. The movement had taken on a life of its own. Your grandfather would be proud, James told Marcus quietly, but not just of you, of everyone who's chosen to stand up for truth. Suddenly, every screen in the room lit up with alerts. Someone was attempting to hack the Supreme Court's document system, the largest cyber attack they'd seen yet. But instead of causing chaos, the attack demonstrated exactly why the new system worked. Hundreds of independent observers spotted the intrusion simultaneously. Thousands of backup copies preserved the integrity of court records. The Transparency Network didn't just survive the attack, it became stronger. This is the real victory, Marcus explained to the president, not just creating a better system, but showing that transparency and truth are ultimately more powerful than secrecy and corruption. His laptop chimed with updates from Dr. Wells's legal education initiative. Law schools across the country were incorporating pattern recognition and transparency protocols into their core curriculum. A new generation of legal professionals was being trained not just in law, but in protecting justice itself. But what about the human cost? Someone asked. All those affected by the old system? Marcus pulled up another screen, showing the work of Hassan's network. Public defenders, and prosecutors working together to review old cases. Wrongfully convicted people being released, families reunited. Justice isn't just about preventing future wrongs, he said. It's about correcting past ones, too. The president nodded thoughtfully. You've started something remarkable here. Not just reform, but transformation. No, Marcus corrected respectfully. My grandfather started it. Judge Sullivan continued it, even if she realized too late. Every person who ever stood up against corruption played a part. I just helped. People see the pattern and their own power to change it. Outside the White House, crowds gathered peacefully. Not in protest, but in celebration. Regular citizens standing watch over the institutions meant to serve them, understanding finally that justice belonged to everyone. Agent Martinez showed them new data from the FBI's International Task Force. The pattern of reform was spreading globally, unstoppable now that people understood what was possible. This is how real change happens, Marcus told the assembled leaders. Not through force or fear, but through showing people a better way. Once they see the truth, they can't unsee it. His phone buzzed one final time. A message from an unexpected source. The children of corrupt judges and officials forming their own organization dedicated to transparency and reform. The next generation choosing truth over power. Your grandfather fought against darkness, James said proudly, but you've taught people how to create light. As they left the White House, Marcus thought about that first moment in Judge Sullivan's courtroom, when a 14-year-old dared to say, "You're wrong." The old system had seemed invincible because everyone thought they had to fight it alone. But the truth was more powerful than corruption. Hope was stronger than fear. And justice, once awakened in people's hearts, could never be silenced again. The United Nations General Assembly fell silent as Marcus concluded his presentation. Representatives from 193 countries had just witnessed how his transparency system had transformed justice across borders. But the most powerful moment came from what happened next. We've seen the system work in established democracies, the Chinese delegate said, rising unexpectedly. But today, I'm authorized to announce that China will be the first non-democratic nation to fully implement these reforms. The chamber erupted in astonishment. Marcus's laptop immediately lit up with analysis. This wasn't just a policy change, it was a seismic shift in global justice. It's not politics, the delegate continued, it's mathematics. The pattern recognition system works. Corruption costs our economy billions. Truth is simply more efficient than deception. Dr. Wells, who had helped adapt the system for different legal frameworks, understood the implications. When even authoritarian systems realize transparency is in their interest. The old excuses disappear, Marcus finished. His screen filled with incoming data as more nations pledged to adopt the reforms. But he noticed something else. A subtle pattern in how the changes were spreading. Look at this, he showed Agent Martinez. Countries aren't just copying our system, they're adapting it, improving it. Each culture adds its own innovations. Hassan arrived with reports from international legal networks. In India, village councils were combining traditional dispute resolution with digital transparency. Middle Eastern courts were integrating Islamic legal principles with pattern recognition technology. Latin American countries were adding protections for indigenous justice systems. The system isn't just spreading, Marcus realized. It's evolving, getting stronger through diversity. Suddenly, his laptop flagged urgent alerts. A coordinated attack was hitting judicial systems across multiple countries, the biggest challenge yet to the global transparency network. But instead of causing chaos, the attack revealed something remarkable. Courts in different nations Speaking different languages, operating under different legal systems, all responded in harmony. The transparency protocols didn't just protect individual courts, they created a united defense against corruption. This is unprecedented, the UN Secretary-General observed. Not just countries sharing information, but actively protecting each other's judicial integrity. Marcus showed them why. The pattern recognition system doesn't care about borders. Corruption in one place affects justice everywhere, so the solutions have to be global too. His phone buzzed with updates from youth organizations worldwide. Students in Africa using pattern analysis to expose corruption in resource contracts. Teenagers in Southeast Asia tracking judicial decisions affecting environmental protection. Young people everywhere becoming guardians of justice. But it's not just about technology, Marcus explained to the assembly. The real change is in how people think about justice. It's not something given from above. It's something we all protect together. James watched proudly as his son demonstrated how regular citizens in different countries were using the system. Your grandfather fought for justice in one courthouse. You've helped people defend it in every courthouse. Dr. Wells introduced the next phase, a global legal education initiative. Universities worldwide would teach not just law, but the skills to protect justice itself. We're creating a new generation of legal defenders, she explained, not just lawyers, but guardians of truth. Suddenly, every screen in the UN displayed breaking news. The International Criminal Court had adopted the transparency system for a landmark case involving multinational corruption. The whole world would watch justice work in real time. But some things must remain secret, argued representatives from several nations. National security can be protected without hiding corruption, Marcus countered. He demonstrated how the system distinguished between legitimate confidentiality and suspicious secrecy. True security comes from justice, not from darkness. Agent Martinez showed new data from Interpol. International crime networks, which had thrived by exploiting differences between legal systems, were finding their traditional methods blocked by the new transparency protocols. They're still fighting back, she warned, trying to find new ways to corrupt the system. Of course they are, Marcus replied calmly, but look at what happens each time they try. His screen showed how every attack made the global network stronger, forcing it to evolve and adapt. A young delegate from Kenya stood up. In my country, we have a saying, truth is like a baobab tree. No one person can embrace it alone. What you've created here, it lets us all embrace justice together. Hassan's international network reported something remarkable. Corrupt officials were starting to resign voluntarily, realizing they couldn't operate in a transparent system. The pattern of positive change was becoming self-reinforcing. This is how lasting change happens, Marcus told the assembly. Not through force or sanctions, but by making justice so transparent that corruption has nowhere to hide. Outside the UN, crowds gathered from every nation, watching on giant screens, not in protest, but in unity. People from different cultures, speaking different languages, all understanding the same truth. Justice belongs to everyone. His laptop showed the pattern of change spreading to the last resistant corners of the world, not because of pressure or politics, but because people everywhere were choosing transparency over secrecy, truth over power. Your grandfather dreamed of justice in one court, James said quietly. You've helped make it possible in every court. The sun set over New York as the UN session concluded, its light reflecting off buildings where millions of people were learning to become defenders of justice. The transformation couldn't be stopped now. It could only grow stronger, reach further, shine brighter. And it all began because one boy dared to question authority and show the world a better way. The International Court of Justice at The Hague buzzed with unprecedented tension. Marcus's transparency system faced its greatest test yet, a massive conspiracy involving judicial corruption across 5 continents, all connected to a shadowy organization known as the Global Justice Initiative. "Don't let the name fool you," Agent Martinez explained, showing intelligence reports. "They're actually a network of corrupt judges, officials, and corporate interests trying to undermine the transparency reforms." Marcus studied the data flowing across his screen. "Look at their strategy. They're not just attacking the system, they're trying to use it against itself." His laptop showed how the organization had begun filing thousands of false corruption reports, attempting to overwhelm the pattern recognition systems with noise. But something caught his eye, a subtle regularity in the chaos. They're still following patterns, he realized. Even in their attempts to create confusion, they can't help themselves. Dr. Wells arrived with news from her international legal network. They're not just attacking courts. They're targeting the entire foundation of global justice, treaty, enforcement, international arbitration, everything. Because they finally understand what we've built, Marcus explained. It's not just about transparency in individual courts. It's about connecting justice across borders. Suddenly, every screen in the building flashed red. The Global Justice Initiative had launched their masterstroke, simultaneous challenges to the transparency system's legality in courts worldwide. They're trying to use legal procedures to destroy legal protection, Hassan observed, reviewing the filings. It's clever. If even one major court rules against the system, the whole network could fragment, Martinez finished. But Marcus saw something everyone else had missed. No, look closer. They made the same mistake Blackwood did. They think law is just about rules and procedures. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up data from the past 6 months of global operations. The transparency system isn't just code and protocols. It's people, millions of them working together to protect justice. As if to prove his point, his screen filled with incoming reports. Court watchers in Brazil spotting patterns matching those in Indonesia. Legal observers in South Africa connecting evidence to cases in Canada. The very attack meant to overwhelm the system was instead demonstrating its strength. "They don't understand," Dr. Wells said, watching the global response unfold. "The system works because it taps into something fundamental, people's desire for justice." James arrived with news from the grassroots level. Communities worldwide weren't just watching their courts anymore. They were actively participating in protecting them. Ordinary citizens had become the front line of defense against corruption. "Your grandfather believed one person could make a difference," he told Marcus. "But you've shown how many people working together can transform the whole world." Suddenly, Marcus's laptop detected something crucial, a pattern within the attack itself. "Look at this. The challenges aren't random. They're all structured the same way, using the same legal framework. Which means they have a common source." Martinez understood. Marcus's pattern recognition system traced the digital fingerprints, leading to an unexpected discovery. The Global Justice Initiative's headquarters wasn't in some secretive offshore location. It was hiding in plain sight, operating from a prestigious law firm in Geneva. They thought they could use legitimate legal procedures to destroy legitimate justice, Hassan said, but they forgot one thing. "The truth leaves patterns," Marcus finished, "and patterns can't be hidden when everyone is watching." The International Court convened an emergency session. As Marcus presented the evidence, something remarkable happened. Judges from around the world began sharing similar findings, each piece fitting together like a global puzzle. "This is unprecedented," the Chief Justice observed. We're not just seeing cooperation between courts, we're seeing the emergence of truly global justice. The Global Justice Initiative's carefully constructed attack had backfired spectacularly. Instead of overwhelming the system, they had proven its resilience. Instead of fragmenting global cooperation, they had strengthened it. But they'll try again, Martinez warned. Power doesn't give up easily. Let them try, Marcus replied, showing how each attack made the system stronger. Every attempt to corrupt justice just teaches us new ways to protect it. His phone lit up with messages from young people worldwide. Students, activists, future lawyers, all committed to defending the transparency system. The next generation wasn't just inheriting justice, they were actively shaping it. This is what real power looks like, he told the assembled court. Not control or corruption, but people everywhere working together to protect truth. Outside The Hague, crowds gathered peacefully, citizens from dozens of countries united in their commitment to transparent justice. The old walls between legal systems were falling, replaced by bridges of cooperation and shared purpose. Your grandfather fought for justice in one country, James said proudly. You've helped people protect it in every country. As evening fell over The Hague, Marcus watched the sun set on a world transformed. The Global Justice Initiative's attack had failed, but it had achieved something its creators never intended, proving that when people stand together, corruption cannot prevail. The revolution in justice wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, growing stronger with every challenge. And it all began because one boy dared to speak truth to power, inspiring millions to become guardians of justice themselves. 2 months after the defeat of the Global Justice Initiative, Marcus stood before the newly established World Council for Judicial Transparency in Geneva. Representatives from every major legal system had gathered to witness something unprecedented. The first truly unified global approach to protecting justice. The attack on our system revealed something crucial, Marcus explained, displaying complex data patterns on the chamber's screens. Corruption doesn't just cross borders, it depends on those borders to hide, but so does justice depend on unity to thrive. His laptop showed real-time feeds from courts worldwide, all operating under the new transparency protocols. But something deeper was emerging, a fundamental shift in how justice itself worked. We're seeing something remarkable, Dr. Wells reported to the assembly. Courts aren't just sharing information, they're learning from each other. Traditional systems are adopting modern technology, while digital systems are incorporating ancient wisdom about justice. Hassan arrived with groundbreaking news from the grassroots level. Communities that had historically distrusted their legal systems were now actively participating in them. Indigenous groups were integrating their traditional justice practices into the transparency framework. Religious courts were finding ways to maintain their principles while embracing accountability. The system isn't just preventing corruption, Marcus demonstrated. It's healing trust between people and justice itself. Suddenly, his screen lit up with a new pattern, one that no one had anticipated. The transparency protocols weren't just affecting legal decisions, they were transforming how institutions themselves operated. Look at this, he showed Agent Martinez. Corporations are voluntarily adopting our transparency standards for their internal arbitration. Governments are applying them to administrative procedures. The pattern of accountability is spreading beyond courts. James watched proudly as his son explained how the system was evolving. Your grandfather fought for justice in courtrooms. You've helped it grow beyond those walls. The World Council's attention focused on Marcus's latest analysis. The pattern recognition system had begun identifying potential conflicts before they reached courts. Disputes were being resolved through transparency rather than conflict. But some say we've gone too far, a delegate from Europe argued. that too much transparency weakens authority. Actually, Marcus responded, pulling up new data, authority is stronger when it's earned through truth rather than imposed through power. His screen displayed statistics from countries that had fully embraced the reforms. Crime rates dropping, civil disputes decreasing, public trust in institutions rising. The patterns were clear. Transparency wasn't weakening systems. It was strengthening them by making them worthy of trust. Dr. Wells presented findings from her global study of legal education. Law schools worldwide were producing a new kind of legal professional, one trained not just in laws, but in protecting the integrity of justice itself. We're witnessing the emergence of something unprecedented, she explained, a global culture of judicial integrity that transcends national boundaries. Suddenly, every device in the chamber received an alert, a coalition of powerful interests. Corporations, political groups, and old guard legal authorities had launched a public campaign against the reforms. They claimed the transparency system was destroying traditional legal values, but their attack revealed something they hadn't intended. Marcus's pattern recognition system traced the campaign's funding sources, exposing links to corrupt networks that had previously operated in shadows. They still don't understand, Marcus told the council. Fighting transparency only makes their motives more transparent. Hassan's international network reported an unexpected development. Regular citizens were spontaneously organizing to protect their local courts. People who had never been interested in legal matters were becoming guardians of justice. This is the real transformation, Marcus explained. Not just in systems or laws, but in people's relationship with justice itself. His laptop displayed a global map of transparency initiatives. Every attack on the system had sparked new innovations in protecting it. Every attempt to undermine trust had resulted in stronger bonds between communities and their legal institutions. Your grandfather believed in the power of one person to fight for truth, James said quietly. But you've shown the power of everyone, fighting for justice together. The council chambers grew silent as Marcus revealed his latest innovation, an artificial intelligence system designed not to replace human judgment, but to enhance human wisdom in protecting justice. The future of justice isn't about choosing between tradition and technology, he explained. It's about using both to serve truth. Outside, the sun set over Geneva's international district, its light reflecting off buildings where a new era of global justice was taking root. The transformation couldn't be reversed now. It had become part of humanity's shared aspiration for a more just world. And it all began because one boy dared to question authority and show that justice belongs to everyone who has the courage to protect it. When the Mediterranean refugee crisis reached its peak, the world witnessed how transparent justice could transform humanitarian response. Marcus found himself at the Emergency Response Center in Athens, where his system faced its greatest humanitarian test. "We're tracking over 200 refugee boats," Agent Martinez reported, studying the massive displays. "But look at the pattern in maritime court decisions." The screens showed how different nations were interpreting maritime law inconsistently, using legal technicalities to avoid responsibility. Marcus analyzed the data streams, his fingers moving rapidly across his keyboard. The pattern isn't just in the decisions, he realized. It's in the evasions. Every court using the same legal frameworks to justify inaction. Dr. Wells arrived with urgent news from the International Court of Justice. They're calling it a legal deadlock, each nation claiming others have primary responsibility. But Marcus saw something in the data that others had missed. His transparency system wasn't just tracking court decisions, it was revealing the human consequences of legal abstractions. "Watch this," he said, integrating refugee movement data with the court transparency network. Suddenly, the human impact of each judicial decision became visible. Every delayed ruling, every jurisdictional dispute had real consequences for real people. The system isn't just showing us legal patterns anymore, he explained to the assembled international officials. It's showing us patterns of human need. His laptop displayed a new kind of analysis, one that combined legal precedent with humanitarian impact. Courts could now see in real time how their decisions affected lives. James watched his son work, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're not just making justice transparent, you're making it human. The pattern recognition system began identifying something unprecedented: correlations between judicial delays and humanitarian outcomes. Every hour of legal debate had measurable human costs. Suddenly, the screens lit up with alerts. A refugee boat had capsized while courts debated jurisdiction, but this time, something different happened. The transparency system broadcast the emergency in real time to every connected courthouse. Look at the response pattern, Martinez observed in amazement. Courts across Europe began issuing emergency rulings simultaneously. The transparency network had transformed legal gridlock into coordinated action. Hassan's humanitarian legal team reported from the field. Rescue ships that had been held back by jurisdictional disputes were now moving freely, authorized by multiple courts working in harmony. The system isn't just preventing corruption anymore, Marcus explained to the emergency response team. It's creating a new kind of justice, one that responds to human needs in real time. Dr. Wells presented findings from similar crises worldwide. The Transparency Network was helping courts address environmental disasters, public health emergencies, and humanitarian crises with unprecedented speed and coordination. But some say this undermines national sovereignty, a senior official argued, that courts should prioritize national interests. Marcus responded by pulling up new data. What if national interests and human interests aren't in conflict? His screen showed how countries that embraced humanitarian justice were experiencing increased stability, economic benefits, and strengthened international relationships. The pattern recognition system had identified something remarkable. Transparency in humanitarian response created positive feedback loops. Nations that helped others found themselves receiving support when they faced their own crises. This is the next evolution of justice, Marcus told the assembly, not just preventing wrong, but actively enabling right. His phone buzzed with updates from youth organizations worldwide. Young people were using the transparency system to coordinate humanitarian aid, track refugee support, and ensure resources reached those in need. Your grandfather fought against corruption, James said proudly. But you've shown how transparency can do more than fight darkness. It can create light. The Emergency Response Center erupted with new activity as the Transparency Network detected another crisis developing. But this time, courts and nations were ready. The pattern of coordinated response was already spreading. We're seeing something unprecedented, Dr. Wells observed. Legal systems aren't just becoming more transparent, they're becoming more compassionate. Marcus's laptop displayed the growing network of humanitarian legal response. Every crisis that the system helped address strengthened the bonds between nations and peoples. Every coordinated action built trust and cooperation. This is real justice, he explained to the international observers. Not just following laws, but serving humanity. Outside the response center, rescue ships moved with new purpose, guided by courts working together for the first time in history. The transformation of justice had reached a new level, from preventing corruption to actively saving lives. And it all began because one boy dared to question not just authority, but the very purpose of justice itself. The United Nations Climate Summit in Stockholm marked a turning point in global cooperation. Marcus's humanitarian justice system, having proved its worth in the refugee crisis, now faced an even greater challenge: environmental justice across borders. "The pattern is clear," Marcus explained to the assembled world leaders, his screens displaying global data. Environmental damage doesn't respect national boundaries, neither can environmental justice. His laptop showed how the transparency system had begun tracking something unprecedented: the relationship between judicial decisions and environmental impact. Every ruling on industrial permits, every court decision about emissions, created ripples that affected communities worldwide. Dr. Wells presented findings from her Global Environmental Law Initiative. "We're seeing courts in different countries spontaneously coordinating their environmental rulings. The transparency system is creating a kind of ecological consciousness in global justice." Suddenly, the summit's screens lit up with urgent alerts. A major industrial accident in Southeast Asia was threatening multiple nations' water supplies. But instead of the usual diplomatic gridlock, something remarkable happened. "Watch the response pattern," Marcus directed, as his system displayed real-time judicial activity. Courts across the region began issuing coordinated environmental protection orders. The Transparency Network had evolved to handle environmental emergencies with the same efficiency it showed during humanitarian crises. Agent Martinez arrived with intelligence reports. "Corporate interests are trying to use jurisdictional disputes to delay environmental enforcement. But look at what happens when we apply the humanitarian pattern recognition protocols." Marcus's fingers flew across his keyboard, adapting the system that had helped refugee boats to track pollution spread. "Environmental damage creates patterns just like human movement," he explained, "and patterns can be traced back to their source." The screens filled with new data as the system began identifying corporate responsibility across borders. Companies that had previously hidden behind complex international structures found their environmental impact exposed to transparent scrutiny. "But this goes beyond just enforcement," Hassan observed, showing reports from environmental justice groups worldwide. Communities were using the transparency system to protect their local environments, sharing data and strategies across borders. James watched his son coordinate the global response. "You're not just making justice work for people anymore, you're making it work for the planet itself." The pattern recognition system had identified something profound: the interconnection between environmental justice and human welfare. Courts could now see how environmental decisions affected not just ecosystems, but communities, economies, and future generations. "Critics say this gives courts too much power," a senior diplomat argued, "that environmental decisions should be left to governments and markets." Marcus responded by revealing new analysis. What if transparency actually makes markets work better? His screen showed how regions with strong environmental justice systems were experiencing increased innovation, sustainable development, and economic growth. Dr. Wells presented data from her international legal network. The transparency system wasn't just affecting court decisions, it was changing how businesses operated. Companies were voluntarily adopting stricter environmental standards, recognizing that transparency made sustainability good business. "This is the next phase of justice evolution," Marcus explained to the summit, "when protecting the environment becomes a shared mission, not just a legal requirement." His phone lit up with messages from youth environmental groups worldwide. Young people were using the transparency system to monitor environmental compliance, coordinate conservation efforts, and hold polluters accountable across borders. "Your grandfather fought for justice in courtrooms," James said proudly, "but you've helped justice expand to protect the very world we live in." The summit chambers, erupted with new activity as the system detected emerging environmental threats. But now, instead of helplessness or denial, there was coordinated action. The pattern of environmental response was strengthening with each challenge. "We're seeing something unprecedented in legal history," Dr. Wells noted. "Courts aren't just interpreting laws, they're helping preserve the conditions that make human life possible." Marcus's laptop displayed the growing network of environmental protection. Every crisis addressed strengthened the bonds between nations, communities, and the natural world. Every coordinated action built momentum toward a sustainable future. "This is true environmental justice," he told the assembled leaders. "Not just punishing harm, but preserving life." Outside the summit, protesters who had come expecting to fight for environmental protection found themselves part of something larger, a global movement where transparency and justice worked together to protect both people and planet. And it all began because one boy dared to question not just human authority, but humanity's relationship with the natural world itself. The Global Industrial Alliance's announcement sent shockwaves through international markets. The world's largest manufacturing consortium declared that environmental transparency requirements were incompatible with industrial growth, threatening to cease operations in countries that enforced them. Markets tumbled as the world faced a stark choice between economic stability and environmental justice. Marcus studied the data streams in the United Nations Emergency Response Center, watching as his system tracked the unfolding crisis. "They think they're forcing a choice between prosperity and protection," he observed, "but the patterns tell a different story." His screens displayed a complex web of relationships between industrial activity, environmental impact, and economic health. Dr. Wells approached with findings from her international research team. "The transparency system has revealed something extraordinary. Regions with the strongest environmental protections are showing the most sustainable economic growth." Agent Martinez arrived with intelligence briefings. "The Industrial Alliance isn't just fighting environmental regulations. They're trying to preserve an old model of business that depends on hiding true costs." Marcus's fingers moved rapidly across his keyboard as he integrated new data streams. The pattern recognition system began identifying correlations that no one had seen before. How environmental transparency actually created new opportunities for innovation and growth. "Look at this," he directed, showing the assembled international officials. Companies that adapted to transparency aren't just surviving, they're thriving. They're developing new technologies, creating more jobs, and building sustainable markets. The screens filled with examples. A Chinese manufacturing giant that had transformed its entire production line to meet transparency requirements, becoming a world leader in clean technology. A Brazilian industrial complex that discovered cost savings through environmental efficiency. An Indian conglomerate that increased profits by eliminating waste and pollution. But some industries can't adapt, argued representatives from the alliance. The costs of transparency will destroy them. Marcus responded by revealing new analysis. What if the real cost is hiding the truth? His system displayed the long-term economic impact of environmental damage, how delayed action actually increased costs exponentially. Hassan's international network reported an unexpected development. Workers within alliance companies had begun using the transparency system to document environmental practices, sharing data across borders. The very people the alliance claimed to protect were choosing transparency. "This is more than an environmental issue," Dr. Wells explained to the UN Assembly. "It's about whether we build our future on truth or deception." Suddenly, every screen In the response center lit up with alerts, the Alliance had launched its ultimatum, beginning shutdowns of major industrial facilities worldwide. But something unprecedented happened. "Watch the response pattern," Marcus directed. His system showed how local communities, armed with transparency data, were already launching alternative enterprises. Workers were transitioning to sustainable industries. Markets were adjusting, favoring transparent companies over those that tried to hide their environmental impact. James watched his son coordinate the global response. "You're not just protecting the environment anymore, you're helping create a new kind of economy, one built on truth." The pattern recognition system had identified something profound. Transparency wasn't a burden on business, it was a catalyst for innovation. Companies that embraced environmental accountability were discovering opportunities that hidden costs had masked. "This is the real choice," Marcus explained to the world leaders, "not between environment and economy, but between past and future." His laptop displayed how the transparency network was transforming industrial practices. Every challenge to the system sparked new innovations. Every attempt to preserve old patterns of exploitation led to the emergence of better alternatives. "Your grandfather fought against corruption in courts," James said proudly, "but you've shown how transparency can transform entire systems." Dr. Wells presented data from around the world. Communities that had seemed economically dependent on polluting industries were discovering new paths to prosperity through sustainable development. The transparency system wasn't just preventing harm, it was creating opportunities. "We're witnessing something historic," she told the Assembly. "The emergence of an economy where truth and prosperity grow together." Outside the UN, markets began stabilizing as investors recognized the new reality. The industrial alliance's threat had backfired, accelerating the transition to sustainable practices. The pattern of positive change was unstoppable, and it all began because one boy dared to question not just legal authority, but the false choice between prosperity and protection of our world. The World Economic Forum in Davos witnessed an unprecedented transformation as Marcus presented the next evolution of the transparency system. The integration of judicial, environmental, and economic transparency had revealed something even more fundamental: patterns of social change that could reshape human society itself. The system isn't just tracking corruption or environmental impact anymore, Marcus explained to the assembled world leaders and economic experts. It's showing us how transparency in one area inevitably leads to positive changes in others. His screens displayed complex data streams showing how regions with strong judicial transparency had naturally developed more equitable economic systems. Areas with environmental accountability had fostered stronger community bonds. The pattern recognition system had identified a cascade effect of positive social transformation. Dr. Wells presented findings from her global social impact study. Communities that embrace transparency in their institutions are experiencing remarkable changes. Crime rates are declining, education levels are rising, and social trust is strengthening. Agent Martinez arrived with new data from international monitoring teams. The Transparency Network isn't just preventing problems, it's actively fostering social innovation. Look at these patterns of community development. Marcus's fingers moved across his keyboard, integrating multiple data streams. The system revealed how transparency was creating virtuous cycles of social progress. When people could trust their institutions, they invested more in their communities. When communities thrived, they demanded more accountability from their institutions. But critics say this level of transparency threatens privacy, a senior policymaker argued. That society needs some shadows to function. Marcus responded by revealing new analysis. What if transparency actually protects privacy better than secrecy? His screen showed how communities with strong transparency systems had developed more sophisticated ways of protecting personal information while maintaining institutional accountability. Hassan's international network reported something remarkable. Communities worldwide were spontaneously adopting transparency principles in their local organizations. Schools, businesses, and civic groups were voluntarily implementing systems to build trust and accountability. This is more than institutional reform, Dr. Wells explained to the forum. We're seeing the emergence of a new social paradigm, one built on trust rather than control. Suddenly, every screen in the conference center displayed urgent alerts. A coordinated disinformation campaign had been launched, claiming transparency was destabilizing society, but the system's response demonstrated exactly why such attacks couldn't succeed. Watch the pattern, Marcus directed. Communities worldwide began sharing real-time data about the positive changes they'd experienced. The Transparency Network had evolved beyond institutional oversight. It had become a tool for social empowerment. James watched his son coordinate the global response. You started by making courts transparent. Now you're helping make society itself more true to its highest ideals. The pattern recognition system had identified something profound. Societies that embraced transparency naturally evolved toward greater justice, sustainability, and human flourishing. The old systems of control through secrecy were being replaced by new models of growth through openness. This is the real revolution, Marcus explained to the world leaders. Not just in how institutions operate, but in how communities thrive. His laptop displayed the spreading network of social transformation. Every attempt to undermine transparency sparked new innovations in building trust. Every challenge to openness led to stronger community bonds. Dr. Wells presented examples from around the world. Neighborhoods that had seemed trapped in cycles of poverty and distrust were discovering new paths to prosperity through community accountability. The transparency system wasn't just preventing corruption, it was creating the conditions for human flourishing. We're witnessing something unprecedented in human history, she told the assembly. The emergence of societies where truth and progress reinforce each other. Outside the forum, communities continued evolving, finding new ways to implement transparency in their daily lives. Markets rewarded honest businesses. Schools flourished with open governance. Civic organizations grew stronger through shared accountability. The transformation couldn't be stopped because it wasn't being imposed from above. It was growing organically from human nature itself. People naturally chose transparency when they experienced its benefits. And it all began because one boy dared to question not just authority, but the very foundations of how society functioned. The system he created had grown beyond justice, beyond environment, beyond economics. It had become a catalyst for human potential itself. 5 years after Marcus first stood up in that Boston courtroom, he returned to address a special session of the United Nations General Assembly. The chamber was filled not just with diplomats and leaders, but with ordinary citizens from around the world who had become guardians of transparency in their own communities. When I first challenged Judge Sullivan's ruling, Marcus began, his voice carrying the wisdom of experience now, I thought I was fighting corruption in one courthouse. What I discovered was that justice isn't just about rules or systems. It's about the courage to stand for truth wherever you find it. His screens displayed a world transformed. The Transparency Network had evolved far beyond its original purpose, becoming a framework for human progress itself. Courts operated with unprecedented fairness. Environmental protection was strengthening economies. Communities were flourishing through trust and accountability. Dr. Wells presented the results of a global impact study. The statistics are remarkable, but the real story is in the changes we can't measure, how people relate to their institutions, their communities, and their own potential for creating positive change. Agent Martinez, now Director of Global Transparency Operations, shared security data showing how patterns of corruption had fundamentally shifted. "We're not just catching wrongdoing anymore," she explained. "We're seeing it become increasingly rare as transparency becomes the natural state of human systems." James watched his son with quiet pride as Marcus revealed his latest innovation, a system that could predict and prevent social problems before they emerged, not through surveillance, but through understanding patterns of human flourishing. The old power structures believed that control came through secrecy, Marcus explained to the assembly, but we've proven that real strength comes through openness, real security comes through trust, real progress comes through truth. His laptop displayed living proof, communities worldwide where transparency had transformed not just institutions, but human relationships themselves. The pattern recognition system had identified something profound. Societies that embraced truth naturally evolved toward justice, sustainability, and shared prosperity. Hassan, now leading a global network of community transparency initiatives, reported how the movement had taken root at the local level. And people aren't just accepting transparency anymore, they're actively creating it in their daily lives. Suddenly, every screen in the chamber lit up with live feeds from around the world. In countless communities, people were gathering to mark the 5th anniversary of the transparency revolution. But they weren't just celebrating, they were innovating, finding new ways to build trust and accountability in their own contexts. "This is what real change looks like," Marcus told the assembly. "Not imposed from above, but growing from within. Not enforced by authority, but chosen by people who have experienced the power of truth." His grandfather's spirit seemed present in the chamber as Marcus shared his vision for the future. The transparency system wasn't just a tool anymore. It had become a framework for human potential itself, showing how openness could unleash creativity, cooperation, and progress. 5 years ago, I was a boy who saw a pattern of injustice and dared to speak up, Marcus reflected. Today, millions of people around the world are doing the same thing, not because they have to, but because they've discovered the transformative power of standing for truth. Dr. Wells presented data showing how the next generation was taking the principles of transparency even further. Young people weren't just using the system, they were reimagining it, finding new applications for building a more just and sustainable world. "This isn't just about oversight anymore," Marcus explained. "It's about unleashing human potential. When people know they can trust their institutions, their communities, and each other, they naturally create positive change." The assembly watched as Marcus initiated one final program, not a new control system, but a platform for human creativity and collaboration. The Transparency Network had evolved into something its original designers could never have imagined. A catalyst for human flourishing. "My grandfather died fighting corruption alone," Marcus concluded, "but his spirit lives on in every person who chooses truth over deception, cooperation over control, hope over fear. The system we built doesn't just protect justice, it empowers people to create it." As the sun set over New York, its light reflecting off the UN building's windows, Marcus thought about that first moment of courage in Judge Sullivan's courtroom. The old systems had seemed invincible because they made people feel powerless and alone. But truth was more powerful than corruption. Hope was stronger than fear. And when people stood together for what was right, no force could stop the light of justice from spreading. The story that began with one boy's defiant "you're wrong" had become a global symphony of voices standing for truth. And in that transformation lay the greatest lesson of all. Real change doesn't come from systems or rules, but from the courage of ordinary people choosing to make their world more just, more transparent, and more true to humanity's highest potential. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.